The call came at exactly 3:07 a.m. I know that because I stared at my phone for a good 5 seconds before answering, trying to decide if I was still half asleep or if something was seriously wrong. "Jesse?" I mumbled, voice rough from sleep. For a second, all I heard was breathing. Fast breathing. Then his voice finally came through, low and tense. "Peter, can you come outside?" I sat up immediately. "What? Why? Are you okay?" Another pause. "Just come out, okay?" That was the weird thing about Jesse. He was usually the calm one. Even when things went bad, he acted like everything was under control. So hearing him sound nervous instantly woke me up. I rubbed my eyes and looked around my dark room. My apartment was silent except for the buzzing of the old ceiling fan above me. "Dude, it's 3 in the morning." "I know. You gonna tell me what's happening?" "No," he exhaled shakily. "Not over the phone." That made my stomach tighten. Jesse and I had been best friends since high school. We'd done stupid road trips together, nearly gotten arrested together once after climbing onto the roof of our old gym, survived terrible roommates, terrible jobs, and even worse relationships. He wasn't dramatic. If he called me at 3 a.m., something had to be seriously wrong. I swung my legs off the bed. "You outside my building?" "Yeah. I'm coming." The line disconnected immediately. I pulled on a hoodie and sweatpants, still trying to wake myself up. My brain kept jumping to worst-case scenarios. Maybe he got into a fight. Maybe his car broke down. Maybe somebody died. By the time I got downstairs, my heart was pounding. The street outside was almost empty, washed in orange streetlights and silence. Cold air hit my face the second I stepped out. And there he was. Jesse leaned against his truck parked by the curb, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his dark hoodie. His messy brown hair looked damp, like he'd run water through it in a hurry. Even from a distance, he looked off. Not hurt. Just wrecked. When he saw me, something in his expression softened instantly. "Hey," he said quietly. I walked over fast. "What the hell happened?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Can we drive somewhere? That's your emergency? Please." I stared at him for a second. Jesse looked exhausted. His jaw was tight like he was holding something in. And weirdly enough, he looked almost relieved just seeing me standing there. "Fine," I sighed. "But if this turns out to be something stupid, I'm pushing you into traffic." That finally got a small laugh out of him. "Fair." I climbed into the passenger seat, and he pulled away from the curb without another word. The city looked completely different at night. Empty intersections. Closed diners glowing under neon signs. Streetlights reflecting off damp pavement from earlier rain. Jesse drove with one hand on the wheel, the other rubbing nervously at the back of his neck. I kept glancing over at him. Something was definitely wrong. "You gonna talk now?" I asked eventually. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "My dad showed up tonight." I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. Jesse rarely talked about his dad. Honestly, in the 7 years I'd known him, I could count on one hand the number of conversations we'd had about him. All I knew was that the guy left when Jesse was a kid and occasionally drifted back into his life whenever he needed money or somewhere to stay. And he was drunk. Jesse laughed bitterly. Again. "Shit. Yeah." The truck felt quiet again except for the hum of tires against the road. I watched his profile carefully. He looked angry, but underneath that, there was something worse. Hurt. "He started saying a bunch of crap," Jesse muttered. "About me. About my life." I frowned. "Like what?" Jesse hesitated. "Stuff about why I'm still alone." That caught my attention. Jesse wasn't exactly unlucky with girls. If anything, girls loved him. Tall, athletic, stupidly attractive without even trying. But relationships never lasted long for him. He'd date somebody for a few weeks, maybe a month, then suddenly lose interest. I used to joke that he just got bored too easily. But the way he looked right now made me rethink that. He called me pathetic, Jesse said quietly. Said there's obviously something wrong with me. Your dad's an asshole. Yeah. You know he is. I know. He said it like he was trying to convince himself. We stopped at a red light, and for the first time since I got in the truck, Jesse looked directly at me. You ever feel like there's something wrong with you, Peter? The question hit me harder than it should have. Because yeah. All the time. Especially around him. I'd spent years pretending I didn't have feelings for my best friend. Years forcing myself to ignore the way my chest tightened whenever he smiled at me too long or touched my shoulder or sprawled across my couch looking unfairly good in sweatpants. It was easier to bury it. Jesse was straight. At least, that's what I always told myself. So I shrugged casually. Everybody feels messed up sometimes. His eyes lingered on me for an extra second before the light turned green again. We kept driving. Eventually, he pulled into the overlook near the edge of town. It sat above the river, empty this late at night except for one motorcycle parked near the railing. Jesse killed the engine but didn't move. The silence inside the truck suddenly felt heavy. Then he sighed and leaned his head back against the seat. I didn't want to be alone tonight. My chest tightened a little. You could have just said that. I know. Outside, the river shimmered black under the moonlight. Jesse rubbed his face tiredly before turning toward me again. You ever think about how one conversation can screw your head up completely? Constantly. That got another small laugh out of him. Then his expression shifted again. Softer this time. Thanks for coming. The way he said it made my stomach flip. I shrugged, trying to act normal. You're lucky I like you. Yeah, he said quietly, still looking at me. Maybe I am. And for some reason, the way he said that made the entire truck suddenly feel too small. We stayed parked at the overlook for almost an hour. At first, we barely talked. Jesse leaned back in his seat staring through the windshield while I scrolled mindlessly through my phone pretending I wasn't hyper-aware of him sitting inches away from me. The truck smelled like cold air, coffee, and Jesse's cologne. Normally being alone with him felt easy. Comfortable. But tonight there was something different hanging between us. Something quieter. More intense. Maybe it was because he looked so vulnerable for once. Or maybe it was the way he kept looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. You hungry? He asked suddenly. I snorted. At 3:30 in the morning? That's not a no. I mean, kinda. Without another word, Jesse started the truck again. Where are we going? Trust me. That usually ends badly. He smirked faintly. You still got in the truck. Fair point. 15 minutes later we pulled into the empty parking lot of some tiny 24-hour diner near the highway. The fluorescent open sign buzzed weakly in the window. This place still exists? I asked. Best pancakes in town. You sound 80 years old. You'll survive. Inside, the diner was almost deserted except for an old couple drinking coffee in the corner, and a tired-looking waitress wiping menus behind the counter. Jesse slid into a booth across from me. Under the harsh lights, he somehow looked even more exhausted. His hoodie sleeves were pushed up, exposing his forearms, and I caught myself staring a little too long before quickly grabbing a menu. Dangerous. That's what being around Jesse always felt like lately. Dangerous in the quietest way possible. The waitress came over half asleep. Coffee? Yes, Jesse answered immediately. I nodded too. The second she walked away, I looked at him again. You seriously okay? He leaned back against the booth with a sigh. I will be. That's not convincing. Jesse rubbed his jaw tiredly. My dad just knows exactly what to say to get in my head. What did he say besides the relationship stuff? His expression darkened. He said I act like I'm hiding something all the time. My stomach tightened. The waitress dropped off our coffees, thankfully interrupting the moment. Jesse grabbed his mug immediately like he needed something to do with his hands. I stirred cream into mine slowly. You hiding something? I asked carefully. His eyes flicked up to mine. And for a second, just 1 second, it felt like the entire diner disappeared. I don't know, he said quietly. Something about the way he answered made heat creep into my chest. I looked away first. Big mistake. Because now I could feel him watching me. The tension between us had become impossible to ignore at this point. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just this constant awareness buzzing under my skin. It had been building for months, honestly. Maybe longer. There were little things I tried not to think about too much. Like how Jesse always sat too close to me on the couch. Or how he got weirdly touchy whenever he drank. Or how every girl he dated somehow ended up complaining that he felt emotionally unavailable. Then there were moments that really messed with my head. Like the time he fell asleep with his head in my lap during a movie and neither of us acknowledged it afterward. Or last month when we went swimming at the lake and I caught him staring at me after I climbed out of the water. I told myself I imagined that one. Probably because the alternative drove me insane. The waitress came back for our order, and Jesse finally seemed a little more relaxed after a few sips of coffee. We ordered pancakes and fries because apparently neither of us understood normal breakfast food. As soon as she left again, Jesse looked at me over the rim of his mug. You remember sophomore year? I frowned. That narrows it down. The party at Dylan's cabin. My stomach immediately flipped. Of course I remembered. It was one of those nights permanently burned into my brain for reasons I tried very hard not to examine too closely. There were like 50 people there, I said carefully. Yeah, but you remember when we slept outside? I laughed nervously. Because everybody inside was throwing up. And because you stole all the blankets. You're dramatic. Jesse smiled for real this time, softer than before. We shared that tiny sleeping bag. I nearly choked on my coffee. Oh my God! What? You seriously remember that? Yeah. I absolutely remembered it too. It had gotten freezing that night. Jesse had insisted we could survive outside instead of sleeping on beer-soaked floors inside the cabin. We ended up crammed together inside one tiny sleeping bag near the fire pit. I barely slept because every inch of his body had been pressed against mine for hours. At one point he wrapped an arm around my waist half asleep and pulled me closer. I spent the next week trying not to think about it. Jesse stared down at his coffee for a second before speaking again. I don't think I've ever slept better than that night. My pulse skipped hard. The air between us shifted again. Dangerous. That was definitely the word for this. Before I could respond, the waitress brought our food over. Thank God. I focused way too hard on cutting pancakes while my brain short-circuited beside him. Jesse stayed quiet for a while too. But every now and then I'd catch him looking at me. Not casually either. Intensely. Like he was trying to figure something out. Finally, after another long silence, he spoke again. You ever think about us? I froze completely. The diner noise faded into the background. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. What? Jesse swallowed hard, suddenly looking nervous for the first time all night. I mean, he rubbed the back of his neck. Like why we never really date anybody seriously. My heartbeat slowly restarted. Right. That. I laughed awkwardly. I don't know. Commitment issues? Maybe. But he still looked at me like that. Like there was something else he wanted to say. Something bigger. Then quietly, almost too quietly to hear, he said, Sometimes I think you know me better than anybody. I looked up at him again. And suddenly the tiny diner booth felt way too intimate. Because the way Jesse was staring at me right then didn't feel friendly anymore. Not even close. I looked away first again. Big mistake. Because now my heart was pounding so hard I could actually hear it in my ears. Jesse leaned back slightly after saying it, almost like he regretted it immediately. But his eyes stayed on me. Waiting. I forced myself to stab another piece of pancake even though I suddenly wasn't hungry at all. You're being weird tonight, I muttered. That earned a quiet laugh from him. Probably. No, seriously. Jesse rubbed his thumb against the coffee mug slowly. I think I'm just tired of pretending all the time. The words hit me instantly. Pretending. My chest tightened. Pretending what? He opened his mouth like he was finally about to say something real. Then his phone buzzed loudly on the table. Jesse cursed under his breath and looked at the screen. His expression immediately hardened. My dad. You gonna answer? No. The phone buzzed again. And again. By the fourth call, even I was getting annoyed. Jesus, I muttered. Jesse declined it again, jaw tight. Then a text came through. I saw his shoulders tense immediately after reading it. What? He locked the screen too fast. Nothing. Jesse. He stared down at the table for a second before exhaling sharply. He's drunk and wants me to come back. Don't. I'm not going to. Another text appeared. This time Jesse laughed bitterly under his breath. What now? He hesitated before sliding the phone across the table toward me. The message read, You always run away when things get too real. I frowned. What the hell does that even mean? Jesse stared out the diner window. He says that every time we fight. Still sounds dramatic. He means. Jesse stopped himself. I waited. But instead of finishing the sentence, he just shook his head. Forget it. The tension between us somehow got worse after that. Not awkward exactly. Just heavy. Like both of us were standing on the edge of something neither one wanted to say out loud first. Eventually Jesse tossed a few bills onto the table and stood up. Come on. Where now? You'll see. You're really enjoying being mysterious tonight. It's either mystery or emotional breakdown, he said dryly. Fair. Outside, the cold air hit us immediately again. The parking lot was empty except for Jesse's truck and a semi parked near the gas station next door. I shoved my hands into my hoodie pockets while following him back to the passenger side. And that's when it happened. Jesse reached for the door at the same time I did. Our hands brushed. Simple. Accidental. But neither of us pulled away immediately. My breath caught. His fingers stayed against mine for one extra second too long before he finally stepped back. Sorry, he muttered quietly. But he didn't sound sorry. Not even a little. I climbed into the truck quickly before my brain completely melted. Jesse got in beside me, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Neither of us spoke for almost 5 full minutes. The silence inside the cab was unbearable now. Then finally, Peter. I looked over. Jesse's eyes stayed fixed on the road. Yeah? Can I ask you something? Depends how insane it is. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Then it disappeared again. You ever? He paused. You ever look at somebody and feel like you're gonna ruin your whole life because of them? My stomach dropped. Every nerve in my body lit up instantly. Because there was absolutely no friendly interpretation of that question. I tried to laugh it off anyway. Damn. You really are having a breakdown. I'm serious. The truck slowed at a red light. Street lights spilled across his face, catching the tension in his jaw. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. Jesse looked scared. Not nervous. Not drunk. Actually scared. Of me. Or maybe of himself. I don't know, I answered carefully. That's not an answer. I swallowed hard. Then yeah, I admitted quietly. His grip tightened on the wheel. The light turned green again, but he didn't move immediately. Cars honked behind us before he finally drove forward again. You ever tell them? He asked. No. Why not? Because it was you. The words sat right there in my throat. Instead, I shrugged weakly. Didn't seem worth destroying everything. Jesse went silent again after that. The city slowly disappeared around us as he drove farther toward the edge of town. Dark roads. Empty intersections. Barely any other cars. Finally, I frowned. Okay, seriously, where are we going? My place. I blinked. You dragged me out at 3 in the morning for emotional trauma, and now we're having a sleepover? Pretty much. That's honestly rude. He laughed quietly again. And weirdly enough, hearing him laugh made some of the tension ease from my chest. A little. Not enough. Because the second we pulled into his apartment complex, my nerves came rushing back full force. Jesse parked but didn't get out immediately. He just sat there staring ahead. Then quietly, "You don't have to stay if you don't want to." I looked at him carefully. Under the dim parking lot lights, he looked exhausted in a way I'd never seen before. Vulnerable. Raw. And despite everything happening between us tonight, I couldn't leave him like that. So I sighed dramatically. "You owe me breakfast again tomorrow." That finally got a real smile out of him. Deal. We headed upstairs to his apartment in silence. The second he unlocked the door, I noticed a broken picture frame near the kitchen trash can. And suddenly I understood. His dad really had come over tonight. The apartment felt tense. Like anger still lingered in the air. Jesse noticed me looking. He threw it. Jesus. Yeah. I slowly stepped inside while he locked the door behind us. Then everything got strangely quiet again. Too quiet. Because now we were alone. Really alone. Jesse tossed his keys onto the counter before pulling his hoodie off over his head. And unfortunately for my sanity, he was only wearing a thin gray t-shirt underneath. I immediately looked away. Too late. "You can take the bed," he said casually. "I'm not stealing your bed. You're the guest. You're emotionally unstable. You need it more." Jesse smirked slightly. "We can share it." My brain stopped functioning instantly. He froze too, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. The silence afterward was brutal. Then he cleared his throat. "Or the couch is fine too." "Right. The couch. Definitely safer." "Probably." But for some reason, instead of agreeing immediately, I looked up at him. And Jesse was already staring at me again. That same dangerous look from the diner. Slow. Intense. Like he was waiting for me to decide something. My pulse started hammering. Because suddenly it felt like this night was about to change everything. I should have picked the couch immediately. That would have been the smart thing to do. Instead, I just stood there staring at Jesse while my heartbeat tried to punch through my ribs. The apartment suddenly felt way too warm. "You sure?" I asked finally, my voice sounding rougher than normal. Jesse held my gaze for another second before looking away first. "Yeah," he muttered. "I mean, we've done it before." My brain instantly betrayed me by remembering every single time we'd accidentally ended up sleeping next to each other over the years. Road trips. Cabins. Movie nights where one of us passed out first. But tonight didn't feel accidental. Not even close. Still, I forced out a laugh. "You make that sound weird." "That's because it is weird." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Jesse rubbed a hand over his face and sighed heavily. "I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me tonight. You keep saying stuff like that. Because I keep thinking stuff I probably shouldn't." My stomach twisted hard. He disappeared into his bedroom before I could respond, leaving me standing there alone trying to breathe normally again. This was bad. Very bad. Because for the first time in years, I was starting to think maybe I hadn't imagined any of it. Maybe Jesse felt this thing between us too. And that possibility terrified me. A few minutes later he came back out wearing gray sweatpants and an old black t-shirt that hung low enough at the collar to expose part of his chest. Which honestly felt targeted at this point. "You want something to sleep in?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're sleeping in jeans?" "I've made worse decisions." Jesse smirked faintly and tossed me a pair of sweatpants anyway. "They're clean." I caught them automatically. Unfortunately, they smelled exactly like him. Which absolutely did not help my situation. "Bathroom's free," he said. I nodded quickly and escaped before my face gave me away completely. The second I shut the bathroom door behind me, I grabbed the sink and stared at myself in the mirror. You're screwed, I muttered. Because I knew that look Jessie had been giving me tonight. I'd spent years secretly wanting it. And now that it was finally happening, I had absolutely no idea what to do. I changed into the sweatpants slowly, trying not to think about the fact Jessie had probably worn them recently. Didn't work. By the time I came back out, the apartment lights were dimmed low except for the kitchen lamp. Jessie stood by the window staring outside, hands resting on his hips. For a second I just looked at him. God, he was unfairly attractive. Tall. Broad shoulders. Messy hair falling into his eyes. That tired look on his face somehow making him even hotter. And maybe it was the late hour or the emotional chaos of tonight, but suddenly it became impossible to ignore how badly I wanted him. Jessie turned and caught me staring. Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched. Then quietly, "You okay?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah." "You sure?" "No." That surprised both of us. A small smile appeared on Jessie's face. "Good," he said softly. "Thought I was the only one losing it tonight." The air between us shifted again. That same dangerous pull. I tried to break it before I did something stupid. "So," I said too loudly, "which side of the bed am I getting in during this very normal situation?" Jessie laughed hard enough to look genuinely relieved. "Wall side." "Perfect. If this gets weird, I can escape through the drywall." "You're dramatic. You called me at 3 in the morning like a divorced dad." "That's fair." The tension eased slightly after that, enough for both of us to breathe again. But it didn't disappear. Not even close. His bedroom was small and dimly lit by the streetlights outside. The bed barely looked big enough for two people comfortably. Which felt intentional somehow. I climbed in first, keeping very carefully to one side while Jessie shut off the lamp. Darkness settled around us immediately. Then the mattress shifted as he climbed in beside me. And instantly every nerve ending in my body became hyper-aware of him. The warmth coming off his skin. The sound of his breathing. The faint smell of his shampoo. We weren't touching. But barely. "This is fine," I muttered into the darkness. Jessie snorted quietly beside me. "Totally normal. Best friends. Very chill. Extremely chill." Neither of us sounded convincing. A few minutes passed in silence. I stared at the ceiling trying to slow my heartbeat. Then Jessie shifted beside me. "Peter?" "Yeah? You ever wonder if people can tell?" The question immediately tightened my chest. "Tell what?" He hesitated. "That you want somebody." "Oh." I swallowed hard in the darkness. "All the time," I admitted quietly. Jessie exhaled shakily beside me. "Yeah." Silence again. Then, "Do you think they know?" I turned my head slightly toward him. Even in the dark, I could make out his outline beside me. "Depends how obvious you are." He laughed once under his breath. "I think I've been pretty obvious tonight." My pulse skyrocketed instantly. The room suddenly felt too small. "Jessie." "I know." But he didn't stop. He exhaled slowly. "I've spent like 2 years trying not to think about this." My heart stopped. Actually stopped. "What?" He turned toward me then. And suddenly we were face to face in the dark, inches apart. Close enough that I could feel his breath. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said quietly. "I swear I didn't." Every muscle in my body locked up. Because there was no misunderstanding him now. No pretending anymore. "Jessie," I whispered. His eyes flicked down briefly toward my mouth before back up again. "I think about you constantly." The confession hit me so hard I forgot how to breathe. For years I'd imagined hearing those words from him. But now that it was real, it almost felt unreal. "You're my best friend," he continued quietly, voice rough now. "And every time I tried dating somebody else, it just made me realize I wanted to be around you instead." My chest physically hurt. "Why didn't you say anything?" Jessie laughed weakly. "Because I thought you were straight." I stared at him in complete disbelief. Then, despite everything, I started laughing. Jesse blinked. What? You idiot. What? I thought the exact same thing about you. His expression completely broke for a second. Like all the tension he'd been carrying finally cracked open. You're serious? Yes. Oh my God! We both laughed quietly then, half relieved and half completely overwhelmed. And somehow during that moment, we moved closer without even realizing it. Until suddenly there was almost no space left between us at all. The laughter faded slowly. Neither of us pulled away. Jesse's eyes dropped to my mouth again. Then softly, "Can I do something really stupid?" Every thought in my head disappeared instantly. Jesse was so close I could feel the warmth of his breath against my mouth. Close enough that if either of us moved even slightly, my pulse hammered violently in my chest. "What kind of stupid?" I asked quietly. His eyes stayed locked on mine. "The kind that probably changes everything." My stomach flipped hard. But the truth was, everything had already changed. The second he admitted he felt the same way, there was no going back to normal after this. And honestly, I didn't want to. So instead of backing away like the smarter version of myself probably would have done, I whispered, "Then do it." Jesse stared at me for half a second like he was making sure I meant it. Then he kissed me. Soft at first. Careful. Like he still couldn't fully believe this was happening. And the second his mouth touched mine, every single year of tension between us exploded at once. I grabbed his shirt immediately without even thinking. Jesse made this quiet sound against my mouth that nearly destroyed me. God. I'd imagined kissing him so many times over the years, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. Because Jesse kissed like he'd been holding himself back forever. Slow at first. Then suddenly deeper. Hungrier. Like the second he started, he couldn't stop. His hand slid up my neck carefully, fingers brushing against my jaw while he pulled me closer. The bed shifted underneath us. I could barely breathe. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. Neither one moved away. "Holy shit," Jesse whispered. I laughed shakily. "Yeah." He looked completely stunned. Honestly, I probably did too. Then before I could say anything else, Jesse kissed me again. This time there was nothing hesitant about it. His body pressed against mine fully now, warm and solid and very real. I felt his hand slide down my side slowly, almost like he was still trying to process that he was allowed to touch me like this. My brain had completely stopped functioning. Years. I'd wanted this for years. And now Jesse was kissing me like he'd wanted it just as badly. The realization nearly overwhelmed me. I pulled back just enough to look at him. "You have any idea how insane this is?" Jesse laughed breathlessly against my mouth. "You think I haven't been panicking for the last 6 months? 6 months? Try longer." That sent another wave of heat straight through my chest. "You're serious?" "Peter," he said quietly, brushing his thumb against my jaw. "I called you at 3 in the morning because you were the only person I wanted." That almost hurt to hear. Not in a bad way. Just intensely. I kissed him again before he could keep talking and completely ruined me emotionally. Jesse smiled into the kiss this time. Actually smiled. And suddenly something shifted between us again. The nervousness started melting away, replaced by something warmer. Easier. Like somehow this made sense now. Like maybe it always had. He rolled onto his back eventually, pulling me with him until I was half lying against his chest. Neither of us spoke for a minute. I could hear his heartbeat racing underneath me. "You know what's embarrassing?" Jesse muttered eventually. "What?" "I thought you hated when I got touchy." I lifted my head immediately. "What?" "You always looked nervous." "That's because I was trying not to fall in love with you." The silence afterward was immediate. Then Jesse looked at me with an expression so soft it physically hurt. "You were?" I laughed quietly. "Jesse, I've been in love with you since like sophomore year." His eyes widened slightly. Seriously? You literally carried me home drunk once and made me ramen at 4 in the morning. That was it for me. Jessie started laughing. That's your romantic awakening? You used the expensive noodles. That's fair. But underneath the teasing, I could still see it on his face. That overwhelmed look. Like he couldn't believe this was real either. Then more quietly. I think I've been in love with you since the lake trip. My stomach flipped instantly. The lake trip? Yeah. I stared at him. That trip had happened almost a year ago. We'd rented a tiny cabin with friends for a weekend. One night everyone else got wasted and passed out early, leaving just me and Jessie sitting on the dock talking until sunrise. At one point I fell asleep against his shoulder. When I woke up, he was still sitting there holding me carefully against him. I thought about that night constantly afterward. You never said anything, I whispered. I was terrified. That honesty in his voice hit hard. Because Jessie never admitted fear. Not to anybody. He brushed his fingers slowly through my hair before speaking again. You know what really screwed me up? What? The way you trust me. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? You just... He exhaled softly. You always look at me like I'm safe. My chest tightened immediately. Because he was safe. Jessie had always been the person I called first. The person I looked for in crowded rooms. The person who made everything feel less awful somehow. And apparently he knew that. You are safe, I said quietly. The look on his face after I said that nearly broke me. He kissed me again, slower this time. Not desperate anymore. Just close. Intimate. Like he was trying to memorize me. Eventually he rested his forehead against mine and laughed softly under his breath. My dad would lose his mind if he knew about this. I groaned. Don't ruin the moment. Sorry. Actually, wait, I said, pulling back slightly. Is that why tonight happened? Jessie went quiet immediately. His eyes dropped away from mine for the first time in a while. Then finally he nodded once. He kept asking why I never brought girls around anymore. Jessie swallowed hard. And I got angry because the whole time I just kept thinking about you. The confession settled heavily between us. You could have told me, I whispered. I know. Why didn't you? Jessie looked back at me then, eyes tired but honest. Because if you didn't feel the same way, I would have lost you. That hit harder than everything else. Because I understood exactly what he meant. I'd spent years terrified of the same thing. So instead of answering, I just kissed him again softly. And this time when Jessie pulled me closer, there was no hesitation left between us at all. At some point during the night, the nervousness faded completely. Not because things stopped feeling intense. If anything, they felt more intense now. But it became easier to breathe around him. Easier to touch him without overthinking every little thing. Jessie lay beside me with one arm wrapped around my waist while we talked quietly in the dark like we'd done 1,000 times before. Except now every glance and every smile meant something different. Something honest. I still can't believe this, he admitted softly. Same. You really had feelings for me that long? I laughed quietly against his shoulder. You seriously underestimated yourself. That's insane. You're one to talk. Jessie smiled faintly and brushed his thumb back and forth against my side absent-mindedly. The simple touch made warmth spread through my chest instantly. It was ridiculous how much I noticed every little thing now. The way his voice softened when he talked to me. The way he kept looking at me like he still needed reassurance this was real. The way he couldn't stop touching me even casually. You know what's funny? I murmured. What? All those times people thought we were dating. Jessie groaned immediately. Oh my God! I laughed harder. Remember your cousin at Thanksgiving? She literally asked if we needed separate bedrooms. And you panicked. Because you almost choked on your drink. That's because you looked terrified. Jessie buried his face briefly against my shoulder, laughing. God. Seeing him like this felt unreal. Lighter. Happier. I'd spent years loving him quietly from a distance, convinced it would always stay that way. Now he was curled around me in bed at nearly 5 in the morning, looking at me like I mattered more than anything else in the room. And honestly, it scared me a little how badly I could get used to this. The room went quiet again after a while. Outside, faint early morning light had started creeping through the blinds. Neither of us had slept at all. Jessie traced lazy patterns against my side while staring at me thoughtfully. "What?" I asked eventually. "You're really calm about this." I blinked. "I'm absolutely not calm." "You seem calm." "That's because if I fully process this, I might pass out." He laughed softly. Then his expression shifted more serious again. "You know this probably changes everything, right?" My chest tightened slightly. "Yeah. I mean, people are gonna notice eventually." The words hung between us. Because despite how good this felt right now, reality still existed outside this apartment. Friends. Family. Questions. And based on what happened tonight with his dad, I knew Jessie was thinking about that too. I studied his face carefully. "You okay?" He hesitated. Then quietly, "I think so." Not a perfect answer, but honest. Jessie sighed and rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "I spent so long trying to force myself to want something different." The confession hurt to hear. "You don't have to do that anymore." His eyes shifted back to mine immediately. The look on his face after I said that nearly wrecked me again. "You make this feel really easy," he admitted. I smiled faintly. "That's because you're dramatic." "Rude. You called me in the middle of the night like somebody died." "I was having an identity crisis." "Understandable." Jessie laughed quietly again before falling silent. Then after a minute, "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "I think everybody else figured this out before we did." I immediately snorted. "Absolutely. My mom definitely knew." "Oh, 100%. She used to ask about you constantly." "That's because she likes me more." "That's true." I grinned smugly. "See?" Jessie shook his head, smiling. Then slowly, the smile faded into something softer again. More vulnerable. "I don't want to screw this up," he admitted quietly. The honesty in his voice hit hard. I reached up without thinking and brushed my fingers through his messy hair. "You won't." "You can't guarantee that." "No," I admitted. "But I know you." He stared at me for a second. Then he leaned down and kissed me slowly again. Not rushed. Not desperate. Just warm and lingering and full of everything neither of us had been able to say for years. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. "You know what's crazy?" he murmured. "What?" "I almost didn't call you tonight." That made my stomach drop immediately. "Why?" "Because I thought if I saw you, I'd finally say something." I stared at him quietly. And I was right." I laughed softly under my breath. "Good." The early morning silence wrapped around us again after that. Peaceful this time. Eventually Jessie glanced toward the window. "It's almost sunrise." "Damn. We should probably sleep." "Probably." Neither of us moved. Jessie smiled lazily. "You first. You're using me as a pillow right now. And my arm's asleep. Worth it." I rolled my eyes but stayed exactly where I was. Because honestly, I didn't want this moment to end either. Not yet. After a while, Jesse's breathing finally started slowing beside me. His arm tightened around my waist slightly, almost unconsciously. I looked over at him in the dim light. He looked peaceful. More peaceful than he had all night. And something about that hit me unexpectedly hard. Because underneath all the tension and confusion and fear tonight, Jesse had called me because he trusted me. Because when everything in his life felt unstable, I was still the person he wanted beside him. That realization settled warmly in my chest. I brushed my fingers lightly against his arm. "Hey," I whispered softly. "Half asleep already," Jessie hummed quietly. I'm really glad you called me. Even exhausted, I felt the faint smile against my shoulder before he answered. Me too. I woke up to sunlight and the smell of coffee. For a second I forgot where I was. Then I felt an arm tighten around my waist. And instantly everything from last night came rushing back. Jessie. The diner. The truck. The confession. The kissing. My heart started racing all over again. I stayed still for a moment, warm under the blankets while Jessie slept behind me, practically wrapped around my entire body. Honestly, it felt dangerously comfortable. His face was buried against the back of my neck, breathing slow and steady. One leg tangled with mine. Like sometime during the night he'd unconsciously decided personal space no longer existed. Not that I minded. Actually, I minded way too little. I smiled slightly to myself before carefully turning enough to look at him. Morning light spilled across his face through the blinds, softening everything about him. His messy hair fell into his eyes, and for once there wasn't tension in his expression. He looked peaceful. And weirdly enough, seeing that hit me harder than any of the kissing last night. Because Jessie always carried stress around like armor. Even when he acted relaxed, there was usually something underneath it. But right now, he looked safe. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Then his eyes slowly opened. For about 2 seconds he just stared at me sleepily. Then memory hit him too. I literally watched it happen on his face. Oh, he mumbled. I laughed softly. Good morning to you too. Jessie blinked a few more times before suddenly smiling against the pillow. Not his usual self-assured grin. Something softer. Warmer. Hi, he said quietly. That one word somehow completely ruined me emotionally. Hi. Neither of us moved away. If anything, Jessie pulled me slightly closer. You're still here, he murmured. You sound surprised. I kinda am. I frowned a little. Why? He hesitated. Then honestly. Because this feels too good to be real. God. I turned fully toward him then, our faces only inches apart again. It's real, I said quietly. Jessie studied my face carefully like he was still trying to convince himself. Then he leaned forward and kissed me slowly. Morning kisses were apparently a completely different kind of dangerous. Softer. Sleepier. More intimate somehow. When he pulled back, he stayed close enough that our noses still brushed lightly. I don't want to leave this bed, he admitted. I snorted. That's because you're lazy. That too. His hand slid absent-mindedly along my side underneath the blanket, warm and careful. The simple touch sent another wave of heat through me immediately. Which Jessie definitely noticed based on the tiny smile that appeared on his face. Oh, he said quietly. Don't. You're blushing. I hate you. No, you don't. Unfortunately true. Jessie kissed me again quickly before finally sitting up with a groan. Coffee? You're asking like I have a choice. You really don't? I watched him walk toward the kitchen, trying very hard not to stare at him in sweatpants. Didn't work. At all. The apartment felt completely different this morning. Lighter. The tension from last night had disappeared, replaced by this strange warmth that settled into everything. Jessie moved around the kitchen comfortably while I sat at the counter half awake watching him. At one point he caught me staring again. You know I can see you, right? I'm evaluating. For what? Signs of emotional instability. He rolled his eyes. Rude. But he was smiling. And honestly, I couldn't stop smiling either. Jessie handed me a mug before leaning against the counter across from me. For a second neither of us spoke. Then his expression softened slightly again. So, what now? The question settled between us quietly. And for the first time since last night, reality started creeping back in. Because this wasn't just one drunk mistake anymore. This was real. I looked down at my coffee for a second before answering honestly. I don't know. Jessie nodded slowly. I just know I don't want to pretend anymore. That hit hard. Because neither did I. Not after this. Not after finally knowing how he felt. So don't, I said quietly. His eyes lifted back to mine immediately. And again, there was that look. That overwhelming softness. He only seemed to get around me. Then his phone buzzed loudly on the counter. Both of us glanced at it. His dad again. The warmth in the room cooled slightly. Jesse stared at the screen for a moment before silencing it. You gonna talk to him eventually? I asked carefully. Maybe. He didn't sound convinced. I hesitated before speaking again. You don't have to figure everything out today. I know. But? Jesse sighed heavily and leaned back against the counter. But I spent my whole life trying to be what everybody expected. His eyes flicked toward me. And now I finally know what I actually want. The way he said it made my chest ache. I stood up slowly and walked over to him without thinking too hard about it. Jesse looked up at me immediately. Then quieter. You're really okay with this? I stopped directly in front of him. With you? I asked softly. He nodded once. I didn't even hesitate. Yeah. Always. The look on his face after that felt almost unfair. Like I'd just told him something nobody else ever had. His hand slid around my waist slowly, pulling me closer until I stood between his knees where he leaned against the counter. You make me feel brave, he admitted quietly. My heart nearly exploded on the spot. I kissed him before he could keep talking and completely destroy me emotionally again. Jesse smiled into the kiss instantly, hands tightening gently against my waist. And suddenly the nervousness about the future didn't feel quite so terrifying anymore. Because no matter what happened next, we weren't hiding from it anymore. By the time we finally left Jesse's apartment, it was nearly noon. Neither of us had slept more than maybe an hour, but somehow I still felt lighter than I had in years. Jesse walked beside me down the apartment stairs carrying 2 coffees while I tried not to smile like an idiot every time our shoulders brushed. Which happened constantly. Apparently now that we'd crossed the line into whatever this was, personal space had completely disappeared. You're staring again, Jesse said without looking at me. I'm sleep deprived. Sure. We reached the parking lot, and he handed me one of the coffees before leaning casually against his truck. For a second we just stood there in the sunlight looking at each other. And honestly, it still felt surreal. A day ago, Jesse was my best friend I secretly loved. Now he was standing in front of me wearing yesterday's clothes, messy-haired and exhausted, looking at me like I was the center of his universe. Life was weird. You know, I said slowly. This is technically your fault. Jesse raised an eyebrow. How? You called me at 3 in the morning and emotionally ambushed me. He laughed softly. Emotionally ambushed? Yes. Pretty sure you kissed me back voluntarily. That's not the point. Jesse grinned then. Really grinned. And there it was again, that warmth in my chest every time I made him genuinely happy. God, I was doomed. His smile faded slowly into something softer. Thanks for answering the phone. The sincerity in his voice hit me immediately. I stepped a little closer without thinking. You never have to thank me for that. Jesse looked down for a second before quietly admitting. I think part of me already knew this would happen. My pulse jumped. Yeah? He nodded once. Every time something bad happened, you were the person I wanted. His eyes lifted back to mine. I just didn't understand what that meant until recently. The honesty between us now still caught me off guard. No hiding. No pretending. Just Jesse finally saying the things he'd buried for years. You know what's funny? I asked quietly. What? I spent so long trying not to make things weird between us. And now? I smiled helplessly. Now you kissed me in your bed after a mental breakdown. That's fair. We both laughed softly. Then Jesse's expression shifted again, more serious this time. I'm probably gonna have to deal with my dad eventually. I nodded slowly. You don't have to do it alone. Something emotional flickered across his face immediately. That look again. Like he still couldn't believe I was here. I'm serious, I added softly. Whatever happens next, I'm here. Jesse stared at me for a long moment. Then he stepped closer too. Close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him again. You know what I realized last night? He murmured. What? I've spent years being terrified this would ruin our friendship. His hand brushed lightly against mine. But honestly, it finally feels like I stopped lying to myself. The words settled deep in my chest. Because that was exactly how it felt for me too. Like something inside me had finally unclenched. Like all those years of hiding weren't necessary anymore. A breeze moved through the parking lot, cool against my face. Jesse looked at me carefully for another second before asking quietly, You want to come over tonight too? I laughed immediately. Jesse, we've been awake together for like 10 straight hours. And you miss me already? Maybe. The fact he admitted it so easily made my chest ache again. I shook my head, smiling. You're impossible. But are you coming? I pretended to think about it dramatically. Then finally, yeah. The smile he gave me after that was so stupidly happy it nearly killed me on the spot. And suddenly I understood something. This whole thing hadn't started last night. Not really. It started in every small moment before that. Every late-night phone call. Every accidental touch. Every time Jesse looked for me first in a crowded room. Every moment we chose each other without realizing why. The 3 a.m. phone call just happened to be the moment we finally stopped pretending. Jesse opened the passenger door for me with a smirk. You getting in or what? I rolled my eyes, climbing into the truck. This is still the weirdest night of my life. Night? Jesse laughed, climbing into the driver's seat beside me. Peter, it's noon. I looked over at him. At the tired eyes. The messy hair. The soft smile he only seemed to wear around me now. Then I smiled too. Yeah, I said quietly. I guess it is.